During the reign of Napoleon, controversial books written by Marquis de Sade, who's incarcerated at a mental institution, have become extremely popular. Due to this, Dr. Royer Collard, known for his archaic strategies in treating mentally ill patients, is summoned. Confident in getting his way, the Marquis engaged in a battle of will against the tyrant doctor. In 1972, an aristocrat, Mademoiselle Renard, basks in worldly pleasures. Given the advantage of her noble birth, she can exercise her wildest desires. This ends when she finds herself at the mercy of a man who triggers her peculiar pleasures. Reality hits her as the man, her executioner, places her head on the guillotine while the mob excitedly waits for her demise, and all she can do is mourn for herself. Meanwhile, Marquis de Sade, a passionate writer and a fellow aristocrat, watches from his window and uses the lady as a subject for his new story. Years later, at the Charenton Institute for the Insane, a laundress named Madeleine sneakily takes a manuscript from Marquis de Sade's chamber, wrapping it up in linens. She strides to the gate but is blocked by Bouchon, a brawny patient. Fortunately, Abbé Ducoulmier, the institute facilitator, reminds the man to act appropriately, so Madeleine rushes away and hands the manuscript to an anonymous horseman who urges her to ask for more manuscripts as demanded by the publisher. Justine, the latest published book, becomes a massive success in the black market and reaches King Napoleon, who orders the book to be burned and the writer shot. However, Delbeni, his advisor, persuades him to treat the Marquise's mental issue with the help of Dr. Royer Collard, who's infamous for his savage treatments. Meanwhile, Colmia teaches Madeleine to read and write, but as he's reminded of his closeness, he steps away and directs the woman to practice alone. That evening, the laundress reads the Marquise's manuscripts to her co-workers. They enjoy the salacious themes while Charlotte, another worker, reminds them of how inappropriate this is. The group ignores her and jokes about how evil the Marquis truly is, while Madeleine defends him against a negative reputation. Unbeknownst to them, Bouchon watches through a peephole and pleasures himself while looking at the laundress. The following day, Valcoux, the assistant, gives Colmia a message regarding Royer Collard's arrival and his role in supervising the Institute's administrative strategies. Simultaneously, Madeleine revisits the Marquise's chamber. The writer holds her hand and commands her to enter. She sneaks into the room and updates him on his book's popularity. Then, she hands him his earnings. The Marquis gives Madeleine some pennies in exchange for her work, and she requests another manuscript, so the man negotiates that he will trade every page for a kiss. The laundress agrees by kissing him on the cheek, but the Marquis deepens the kiss, which surprises her. Colmia enters the room, noticing the door ajar and seeing Madeleine slapping the Marquis and hiding the manuscripts behind her. She justifies her actions since the man crossed the line by treating her similarly to the character of his book. She storms off with the manuscript, but Colmia chases her and gently reminds her that it's better to come to confession than visit the Marquis in his room. The writer then diverts the Abbé's attention by inviting him to drink, which the facilitator takes to remind the Marquis to follow the rules and to put his wicked thoughts into paper. The Marquis promises to do so, and the Abbé leaves. Finally, the doctor arrives at Charenton, and Valcoux escorts him to Colmia, who's leading a choir as a therapy for the patients. Royer Collard cuts to the chase as he emphasizes that the Institute's management is at his mercy by Napoleon's command and demands his own office. Colmia inquires about the monarch's interest in Charenton, and the doctor tells him he will focus on the Marquis. Colmia leads him to the aristocrat's chamber, where he's directing a stage play. He introduces the doctor to the Marquis, but he's greeted with hostility. Royer Collard probes why the Marquis is in a mental institution, not a penitentiary. Colmia expounds that it's due to his wife's choice, since, for the woman, it's better to be the wife of a demented person than that of a transgressor. The Abbé explains his methods of treating the patients using theater, music, and arts. He emphasizes that the Marquise's evil behaviors have dramatically toned down due to this. However, the doctor informs him that the Marquise's therapeutic writings have been widely distributed outside the institute. Colmia denies this, but the doctor presents him with a printed copy of Justine. Then, Royer Collard tells him that the institute can be shut down because of this, so the Abbé argues that hundreds of patients rely on them. Due to this, the doctor plots to use the barbaric treatments that he prepared for the aristocrat. Still, Colmia disputes this and asks to give him a chance to speak with the man, promising to guarantee this won't happen again. Madeleine follows the Abbé to ask about the events, and he discloses the publishing of the indecent books which reached Napoleon, making the laundress anxious. Colmia confronts the Marquis and criticizes his work's aesthetic and literary sense, which he objectively accepts. The Abbé expresses his disappointment regarding the writer's disobedience and threatens to remove his liberties. This unsettles the Marquis, and he argues with Colmia, pointing out how the doctor is overstepping his bounds. The Abbé relays that they're faced with closure, and the other patients are unlike him, who's privileged, so he pleads that their fates lie on his pen. Upon hearing this, the Marquis promises to comply. Meanwhile, Madeleine watches the scene through the peephole, which the doctor witnesses, so she hastily leaves. Afterward, the Abbé gladly informs the doctor that his friendship with the Marquis helps make the other promise to comply with the Institute's rules, which the other is doubtful of. Then, Royer Collard momentarily leaves Charenton to retrieve his promised bride from the Panthamont convent. He's warmly welcomed by the nuns and is escorted to Simone's room, his young bride. Simone becomes surprised upon seeing the doctor and reluctantly comes with him at the urging of the nuns. They soon arrive at their estate, where the emperor awards the doctor. Monsieur Delbeni welcomes them and introduces Monsieur Puy, a young architect assigned to the renovations. Royer Collard instructs the architect to give everything his wife desires, but commands him to put bars on her windows to shelter her from worldly things. That evening, the husband enters his wife's room to consummate their marriage without the woman's consent. Soon, news about the doctor and Simone's union spreads fast as the gossip highlights their age gap and the wife's purity. Madeleine relays the story to the Marquis, who prompts him to write a farce about it to be performed in the Institute's theatrical event. On the night of the play, the Abbé welcomes the guests, which include the doctor and Simone, whom they mistake for his daughter. As everyone settles for the program, the Marquis arrives and sits on the front row, while the author encourages the actors to do their best in giving the doctor a show of a lifetime. When the narrator steps on the stage, he announces they will perform a new play dedicated to the doctor and his bride entitled The Crimes of Love. The audience anticipates the play while Colmia sits nervously about the sudden change. The audience happily welcomes the farce, especially as the story is intriguing enough, showing how an older man takes a pure young bride and corrupts her. In contrast, the young woman remains clueless about the evil being done to her. The Abbé holds his rosary in anxiety while the doctor commands an attendant to escort Simone out. Meanwhile, Madeleine, who's assisting in the play, is left alone backstage as the actors step on the stage. Bouchon uses this opportunity to touch her, so she grabs a flat iron and presses it against the patient's face to escape. The man screams in pain and falls onto the main stage, interrupting the play. Immediately, Colmia attends Madeleine and commands others to bring Bouchon to the infirmary. Despite the Marquise's attempt to announce it's only a play, echoes of boos can be heard in the hall while some still clap reluctantly. Royer Collard storms off and the Abbé chases after him to explain the situation. Still, the doctor firmly declares the theater to be closed and threatens the facilitator to tighten his control or Charenton will be completely shut down. Afterward, Colmia confronts the Marquis, who's nonchalantly eating, satisfied with the trouble he created. Frustrated, the facilitator confiscates the writer's quills and ink, which the man indignantly fights over, saying that writing is his life. Still, the Abbé disregards him and leaves with the writing paraphernalia. The following day, the Marquise's wife visits him, bringing chocolates and peculiar items he requested. However, the husband slaps his wife, venting his frustration for losing his quills. He blames her for being useless and sending him to a mental institution. Still, the wife argues that he's safer and in a better condition than her, who faces humiliation every waking hour. He continues blaming her for everything, so Valcoux barges in, taking the woman away. Meanwhile, at the doctor's estate, Puy praises Simone's exquisite aesthetic taste and relays it to her husband. Suddenly, Marquis Dussaud's wife barges in and interrupts them to discuss her husband. The woman requests Royer Collard to cure her husband and, if not, to fully subdue him. The doctor offers unique treatment strategies, which correspond to great prices, so the Marquis explains that she lacks wealth. However, the doctor proposes to use her husband's earnings from his published books, which will also help her regain a spot in the high society, so the woman complies. Due to this, the doctor keeps his eye on the Marquis more and deprives him of his peculiar tastes. Still, he finds other ways to remain writing as he discovers that wine can stain white linen like ink. He hurriedly takes a chicken's bone and uses it as a quill. The following day, Madeleine knocks on his door for his linens, and she notices the scribbles on them, so she excitedly takes them and copies them on paper in her quarters. Her blind mother asks her to read the story aloud, and they both enjoy the peculiar story of a man who finds pleasure in lifeless bodies and laughs at it. Unbeknownst to them, Bouchon is watching through a peephole. The following day, Madeleine hands the manuscript to the horseman, but the other laundresses discover that the linens are stained. The doctor soon discovers that there are writings on them, despite Madeleine's effort to cover it up by pointing out that her mother is blind and the sheets may be from anyone. Colmia immediately seizes everything in the Marquise's room that may be used for writing. The aristocrat reasons with him, but he remains stern on his decision. Then, the Marquis begins criticizing his chastity, which makes the Abbé strangle the writer before he storms off. Meanwhile, Simone sneaks away from her guards to purchase a copy of Justine. She rips her old book and glues the Marquise's book on its cover to hide its identity. Soon, she becomes acquainted with a new world from which she finds pleasure. On the other hand, the Marquis breaks a mirror and uses the blood from his fingertips to write on his clothes. When Madeleine arrives for the linens, he convinces the woman to enter his chambers and proudly presents his new book on his garments. Unbeknownst to them, Charlotte is spying on her, so the moment Madeleine exits the room, the laundress warns her of the consequences of her actions. At the same time, the Marquis grabs the chance to run out of the room to present his work to the other patients, so Charlotte calls the guards. As the Marquis celebrates with the others, the doctor arrives to drag him back to his room with his men. Colmia confronts him and commands him to remove his clothes and wig. The Marquis mocks the Abbe's convictions since he knows the man is also against this strategy. Teary-eyed, Colmia leaves the bare Marquis in an empty room. Simultaneously, Charlotte informs the doctor that Madeleine is conspiring with the writer, giving the woman whippings as punishment. Upon knowing this, Colmia unties her and takes on her punishment, but the doctor insults him by pointing out that martyrdom should be given to his fate, not to a laundress, which solicits laughter from the crowd. As Madeleine gets treated in the infirmary, the Abbe asks her why she's helping the Marquis, and she explains that his work somehow gives her an escape from the real world. On the other hand, Simone applies what she read from Justine and seduces Puyi. That night at Charenton, Madeleine sneaks into Colmia's room to express her frustration, but they kiss instead. Surprised, the Abbe pushes her and sends her away. In guilt, he follows and calls her, but finds Charlotte in the hallway instead. The following day, he approaches Madeleine to explain, but the woman refuses to be near him as it's a sin. Meanwhile, Puyi and Simone write a letter to the doctor about their elopement while they enjoy their intimate moments. When the doctor returns home, he finds the letter and the concealed book of Justine. He returns to Charenton and vents his anger on the Marquis as he torments him more using his equipment, but the man remains willful. Afterward, Madeleine visits the Marquis and finds him shivering in the corner. She bids him goodbye as she'll likely be kicked out of the institute, so she requests the Marquis to tell her a story so that she can transcribe it as a remembrance. The writer initially refuses, but upon seeing the empty corridors, he asks the woman to prepare her quills that night. That evening, the Marquis conspires with the other patients and passes the story through them up to the laundress's room, with Bouchon as the last stop in the adjacent room. However, an arsonist, Dafan, hears the word fire from the story, encouraging him to grab the candle from the other room through the hole and set his bed ablaze. As the chaos from the fire rises, Bouchon breaks into Madeleine's room and attacks her. Unfortunately, the Marquis can only hear her screams through the holes in the wall and he yells her name, helpless in his current state. The other patients imitate the Marquis, which awakens the Abbe, who immediately looks for Madeleine. The doctor searches the institute and finally arrives in the room first. However, when he opens the door and hears the screams, he closes it again and leaves. Colmia arrives at the Marquis's door, who urges him to hurry and save the woman. When the Abbe enters Madeleine's room, he sees the papers with Madeleine's transcriptions of a character's death. Then he sees Bouchon, who's frantically apologizing before running away. Colmia sees the wash basin with the water stained with blood, and as Madeleine's mother uses the wood to stir it, she notices something in it. Colmia peeks into the water, sees Madeleine's lifeless body, and mourns regretfully. When the sun rises, the horseman arrives, but the laundress isn't waiting by the gate as he watches the people clean up from the fire. The Abbe prays for her soul during her funeral, and Bouchon is placed in an iron cast, unable to move. The doctor ignites Colmia's conscience by blaming the Marquis for writing the book. Because of this, Colmia charges at the aristocrat's new cell in the doctor's facilities, where he's chained like an animal. Colmia condemns the writer for causing the death of an innocent person, telling him that he respected the woman and she passed away pure, which the Marquis mourns. As punishment, his tongue is cut while Colmia watches. Afterward, Colmia punishes himself for he knows the act is wrong. Then he presents the tongue to the doctor, who praises him. Then, the Abbe proceeds to where Madeleine's body is and spends the night with her, imagining that she's still alive. He feels guilty afterward and rushes to his room, where Valcoux immediately calls him due to the Marquis. When Abbe arrives at the cell, he discovers that the man used this filth to write on the walls. He cradles the unconscious Marquis and removes the cloth from his mouth. He prays for his soul and asks him to kiss the cross of his rosary, but the man swallows it instead, ending his life. Shortly after, screams of agony echo in the cell for another loss. A year later, Dr. Royer Collard welcomes Abbe du Maupas to Charenton. He tours the man around the institute, which is now converted to a printing press where the patients are assigned to different stations according to their needs. The new Abbe praises how subdued the patients are and notices that the books they're printing on are the works of Marquis du Sade. The doctor explains that the man entrusted his works to him, so they use the profits for the institution's benefit. Then, Royer Collard leads him to the previous Marquis's room, where Colmia is currently confined. He explains that this patient is dangerous to many and the new Abbe should be wary. Kolmia warns his successor about the doctor's evil deeds and grabs the chance to strangle the older man. Mapa helps the doctor and they leave the deranged man who's asking for some quills. As Kolmia laments his situation, the laundry hole opens and Madeleine's mother hands over some paper, ink, and a quill, telling him to use it well as he owes it to her daughter.